Sasha, we're here on Gadigal country at beautiful Pirrama Park, and you're a director of Aspect Studios. Tell me a little bit about Aspect Studios and the work that you do.
So, welcome to the park. Aspect Studios is an Australian landscape architecture urban design firm. We're actually a little bit bigger than we ever intended to be. We're about 200 people now. We're in China as well, and we've got about 5 offices in Australia. And the work that we do ranges from large-scale city infrastructure projects to parks like this. Anything that has design potential, we are in there.
And how does this project fit into the timeline of the work that's being produced by Aspect Sydney?
So this project was probably our first big park of a public nature. So it was done for the City of Sydney Council, a rather large budget, much bigger than we were ever used to working with. And at a 2-hectare waterfront park, it came at a time when we were just kind of maturing into doing public work. So it's a very seminal project for our office.
And what did the client want? They've come to you, the City of Sydney, doing lots of parks now around Sydney, but they came to you and asked for what?
So this was a public tender, and so we won a master plan first of all for the site, and we did that in collaboration with Craig Burton Cab Consulting, Hill Fallis Architecture. They were the principal design collaborators. We were leading it as landscape architects. So we did the master plan, and the master plan vision came from really a ground up community aspiration, because this site was quite a contested site. It was owned by the state government, and then it was purchased by local government, by Clover Moore's team at City of Sydney Council. And they purchased it with the intent to not have development on it, to basically give it back to the community and bequeath it as a park for evermore. So their aspiration was really driven by huge community push to not have more waterfront development on this waterfront site. It's a post-industrial site. This community here was very vocal. They jumped over the fences, they graffitied the ground, and these are people in their 60s and 70s, retired professionals who live here in Piermont, who really pushed for the government to make this a park and not have development. So we owed a very big debt to the local community here.
So it must have been something that was inaccessible. What's the history of this site?
Yeah, so like a lot of the spaces around Sydney Harbour, this was a working, originally, pre-colonial time, this had a fabled spring down through here that had a sandy beach and a beautiful spring. And when you have a look at some of the design elements, you'll see that is used in a metaphoric way in the play space, the sand and the water play that we have here. So originally a beautiful, sandstone escarpment coming down to this part of the inner harbour. And in the industrial period of Sydney's growth, this was actually last used by the water police site, and it had the name of the former water police site when we inherited it. It's had a range of other uses, from CSR, so sugar, that was used in this site and transported back to the city. So it was, like many of these harbour front sites, it was a very important industrial site in the growth of Sydney.
Sasha, what are the key design concepts for this site?
So what we wanted to do was to reveal some of the pre-industrial conditions of the site. What you can see here, where we're standing on the waterfront, is that the site has been sculpted. Actually, a quarter of the site has been taken away and restored back to the harbour.
Right.
So the water's been allowed to come in. And that's because it previously was this idea of a beach. And we wanted people to step down to the water and engage with it. If they wanted to bring their kayak or go for a swim, that is able to be done here with the stepping down. But the main design moves, there is a central path that you'll see, which is really the spine, and that's the kind of armature, if you like, of the park. That's called the foreshore walk, or the waterfront walk. And off that are a series of park rooms. We've got the playground in the south, which hugs into the existing sandstone escarpment, the cafe. We've got the grove, which is the series of banksias and ukes, all local plants that have been stored there. We've got here the open area of turf. This is really about just creating an uncluttered, large space for community events, and also to recognise that this is reclaimed land, this is terra firma. So the sort of terra firma, or the water edge, is much more textural.
Yeah.
It has slight level changes, whereas this is really flat and tectonic to give an indication that this is actually constructed landscape out through here. So that's it. The spine is the key move, and then the series of park rooms which come off that.
And the planting here, Sasha, is really textural and lush, and amazing canopy with the Angophoras. Can you talk us through a little bit more of the detail in the planting palette?
It's a very local planting palette. We in fact had some local community members go and source seeds for us from the local area and propagate plants, and they were used in this. So that's some of the ukes. These beautiful figs were brought in, the one that we're standing underneath now. So there's probably 3 different types of figs, 4 or 5 different types of ukes in here, including the Angophoras, the Banksias down through here. So a very robust, very Australian palette. Of course, we're inspired by the lineage of waterfront parks in Sydney, the Sydney School, the Mackenzie, Rickard, these guys, and the way they used plants in the sort of 70s and 80s in a way to contemporary kind of look at that planting palette and the use of plants in that regard. But what you'll see as well is a lot of low planting down through here. These are water sensitive urban design channels. There's 2 major ones that collect water from the surrounding streets, Harris Street and Pirrama Road. That's brought into the park, filtered, and then put back out into the harbour. So they're playing a really important role in cleaning the water before it goes back out.
And I wanted to ask you about climate change, sustainability. We have to design for that now as landscape architects. The water element is obviously a part of that. How else has climate change and sustainability been included in the work here?
Probably in a few levels. I mean, everything that's done in this park has been done in a very authentic way, and to be hopefully using materials that will be here for 50 to 100 years. It's all kind of industrial materials, but also natural materials. So you'll see large timber decks, you'll see precast concrete, which probably not the most sustainable material, but it's not going anywhere quickly. The other elements, I suppose, are the solar panels, which you'll see on the shade canopies, which power the park lights.
Right.
Again, the cleaning of water is a big part of it. The other thing, which is a bit more subtle and poetic, is that on the waterfront steps, there's a little bit of poetry which talks about what lies beneath the still surface of the sea, and it talks about sea level rise in a way that you can't always see that piece of poetry. Sometimes when it's low tide, you can read the entire thing.
Yeah.
When you come back at high tide, today's high tide, mid tide, you can only read a little bit of it. So you have to come back and see when it's low tide what that text actually talks about. But it's just talking about the truth lying beneath the still surface of the sea. And for us, it's a little hint at sea level rise and climate change.
I love those poetics, and I love the way that you've talked about materiality, because I would imagine that some of the material is recycled and therefore, not having a high carbon output as well. Is that right? Am I seeing recycled materials across the site?
You're seeing a lot of materials which have been just left in situ rather than recycled. So if you look around at some of the kind of post-industrial relics, some of the wharf structures, some of the headstocks of the old concrete which actually held the former concrete deck of this place up, that a lot of that has been left in situ. We haven't removed that, so it doesn't become landfill somewhere else. Lots of timber, recycled timber has been used, so all of the timber that you see around us right now, that's not the timber decking, but the large chunky timber is all recycled. Down in the play space as well, we use a lot of recycled timber. So we're trying to be super mindful about those things.
And it's a lovely tactile nature as well for children and users alike.
Yeah, I mean, this is the waterfront language as well. So if you look around, there's the old buildings are masonry and chunky sections of timber, steel, and these are the materials that we've tried to use within the park to give it context.
Sasha, I wanted to talk about the site sectionally, longitudinal and then the cross section. Can you tell me what's happening on the longitudinal section?
Yes, so this site broadly is a north-south site, essentially. So the longitudinal section is really a north-south section, and you start on high as you come down from the ridge. So Harris Street is a classic Sydney High Street, which is a ridge street coming down to the water. And it's a pretty unique typology in Sydney where the street will end at the harbour. So what happens is when we drop down into the park, it looks relatively flat, but there is topographical change, and in fact it dips down to the middle of the park, and at that dip point, that's where we release water back into the harbour. So you see this slight inflection as it comes down the park to the middle and then raises back up to the kind of headland. And then if you take a section across, the short section, the east-west, obviously we've got the water and the harbour coming in, and the tide gives that section variation. You've got the stepping of the precast, which are these sort of big tectonic plates, which really talks about the reclaimed land. And then as you move past the waterfront promenade, back up into the site, there's about a metre, a little bit more than that, of level change, which is where we have these boomerang in situ concrete walls, which hold actually a lot of the excavated material from here. We've relocated back over in the Grove. In that level change is actually site fill that we've relocated.
Wow, and I just wanted to talk about the beautiful big sandstone wall. It's out of sight, but it's one of the edges to the site, really distinguished in Sydney, and that obviously just finishes that cross section as well in the east.
Yeah, it does. So obviously that was one of the existing features, and we loved how when the sun's about to set in Sydney, it's summer now and it'll set late, what happens is that wall just explodes in oranges because it's west facing. It's a similar condition that you have at Barangaroo as to here, and a number of other places which Sydney does very well with these finger peninsulas coming out. So one side west facing will be this beautiful orange sandstone. On top of that, obviously there's residential, and that's the medium density residential of this Pyrmont community, which in a way frames Pirrama Park, and that's who we're designing for. That's who this park is for. These guys in the local community, the workplaces that are here, but it's also set up to be a bigger destinational park.
And I wanted to ask you about that because the park's nothing without the users, the end user.
Yep.
How have the community of Pyrmont, the broader community of the Inner West, the City of Sydney, how have they responded to the park?
Well, it's been a while since the park's been open, so if I put my mind back to when this park was conceived, we did about 30 hours of community consultation with a very, very passionate community. So they had a huge amount of input into kind of design and their aspirations for what it might be. And so I feel we listened in a way, and I feel that this kind of life is a testament to that the park is still catering for its constituents, its users. So look, it was a highly optimistic and very positive process with the community. And look, I think it was purely just a positive outcome.
Maybe just about users, there's definitely children here, we've got the play space,
Okay.
but you've seen, I've seen joggers, it's one of the infamous longer routes for the Inner West along the Pyrmont edge here, multiple ages, intergenerational space, so critical for our cities.
Yeah, so a big part of this is the play space, which is here, and for us and our sort of project history, this was one of the larger play spaces we'd done. It's open, it's unfenced to the harbour. It was considered a bit of a risk at the time. We had a really sophisticated client in the City of Sydney with landscape architects directly as our clients within the City of Sydney, which helped a lot. So we're able to use devices that are part of our palette, walls, planting, seating, edges, to create little interfaces so that it wasn't as risky for parents, carers to have their kids playing in a play space nearby the harbour. But we really wanted to cater for the different demographics, not just age, but cultural as well. There's a lot of different communities of different ethnic backgrounds living in high density housing around here. And this park is large enough and diverse enough to cater for a whole range of different uses.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Sasha, for joining us today, showing our students a wonderful tour through the park.
Thank you for having me back here. I love coming back to our projects, and I am just one of a very passionate group of people that was involved in this park, so I pay tribute to them as well.
Excellent. Thank you.